Chapter 12, Part 2 of U.S. Marine Operations in Korea, 1950 to 1953. Volume 1, The Pusan Perimeter, by Lynn Montross and Nicholas Canzona. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mission completed. Brigade embarkation at Pusan. The movement to Pusan was completed by the morning of 7 September, and the brigade troops found themselves back at the docks where they had landed a little more than a month before. In fact, the docks were to be their bivouac area during the next 6 days. The men slept in the open and took their meals on board the transports in which they would soon be sailing around the peninsula. The survivors of the Naktong fights, even the latecomers who had joined the brigade at the Bean Patch, felt old and worn when they saw the large draft of shiny new Marines just landed as 3rd Rifle Companies organized with their own NCOs and platoons. The veterans had forgotten how young and troubled a Marine could look, how neat and clean he could appear in a recently issued utility jacket. The new companies were immediately assigned to their battalions. It was another job for officers and NCOs who had the responsibility of replacing equipment lost in action as well as servicing ordnance, motor transport, and other heavy equipment which had been sent from the Bean Patch to Pusan late in August. General Craig and his staff had their headquarters in one of the Pusan University buildings. There was no opportunity for planning, let alone rehearsals, for the forthcoming amphibious assault at Incheon. Craig and his officers had all they could do to get the brigade ready for embarkation. Among the tasks to be accomplished in less than a week, it remained to give some weapons training to the 3,000 troops of the 1st Korean Marine Regiment. The newly raised unit, attached to the brigade for embarkation, was to make a name for itself within the next year and become the 4th Rifle Regiment of the 1st Marine Division. But in September 1950, there were great gaps in the training of the KMCs. The men kept their rifles scrupulously clean, and they could strip an M1 expertly, but few of them had ever fired a shot. Marine NCOs had the hazardous duty of giving the eager and excited KMCs their first target practice after 8 rounds of ammunition for each man had been acquired. No Marine casualties resulted, fortunately, but puffed and bruised cheeks were the rule among Koreans having their first experience with an M1's recoil. There was, of course, no end of scuttlebutt going the rounds of the Marines as to their destination. One day the troops were lined up in formation and read a long lecture on the hydrographic aspects of the west coast port of Pusan. It is to be hoped that this red herring made some impression upon the Koreans who were listening, since Pusan was a headquarters of enemy spies. As for the Marines, most of them concluded that at least Pusan could be eliminated from the list of possible objectives. The secret was well kept by brigade officers in the higher echelons. 2 engineer officers, First Lieutenant Ernest P. Skelt and Commissioned Warrant Officer Willard C. Downs, were given the secret mission of constructing wooden scaling ladders for the next operation. This project gave rise to more rumors, but it is safe to say that few men in the ranks knew the answer when the brigade was deactivated at 0001 on 13 September 1950. The components immediately resumed their old unit designations in the 1st Marine Division and sailed to take part in the amphibious assault on Incheon scheduled for the 15th. Results of brigade operations. As the mountains behind Pusan faded from sight, General Craig and his men could reflect that the brigade's 67 days of existence had been productive. Altogether, the Marine Air-Ground Team had fought 3 difficult offensive operations in a month while traveling 380 miles with a third of its organic transportation plus Army vehicles. Total casualties for the brigade included 148 KIA, 15 DOW, 9 MIA, 7 of whom were later reclassified as KIA after recovery of the bodies, and 730 WIA. It was estimated that the Marines inflicted total casualties of 9,900 killed and wounded on opposing NKPA units. Enemy losses of arms and equipment were on such a scale as to impair the effectiveness of the forces concerned. In its initial operation, as a component of Task Force Keene, the brigade had the major part in the 1st Sustained 8th Army counterattack, the military equivalent of a hard left jab which rocks an opponent back on his heels. General MacArthur, when reporting to the United Nations, asserted that This attack not only secured the southern approaches to the beachhead, but also showed that the North Korean forces will not hold under attack. The Communist drive in this sensitive area came closest of all NKPA thrusts to the vital UN supply port of Pusan. Up to that time, the NKPA unit spearheading the advance, the 6th Infantry Division and the 83rd Motorcycle Regiment, had never suffered a reverse worth mentioning since the outset of the invasion. Then the counterattack by the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade hurled the enemy back 26 miles in 4 days from the Chindong-ni area to Sechon. It was estimated that the Marine Air Ground Team killed and wounded 1,900 of the enemy while destroying nearly all of the vehicles of an NKPA motorized battalion, in addition to infantry armament and equipment. The enemy threat in this critical area was nullified for the time being and never again became so serious. Marine efforts assisted Army units of Task Force Keene in taking new defensive positions and defending them with fewer troops, thus freeing some elements for employment on other fronts. Finally, the Marines earned more time and space for the building up of 8th Army forces in preparation for a decisive UN counteroffensive. The next brigade operation, the First Battle of the Naktong, ranks with the hardest fights of Marine Corps history. The enemy, after showing skill and aggressiveness in breaching the last natural barrier of the Pusan perimeter, widened his Naktong bridgehead and took strong defensive positions in preparation for an all-out offensive while still maintaining his material superiority. Only 2 8th Army units were available for a counterattack, the 27th Infantry and the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade. The Army Regiment being needed in reserve on the southern front, the firemen of the Pusan perimeter were placed under the operational control of the 24th Infantry Division on the central front. There the Marines had the mission of clearing the enemy from Obongni Ridge and 2 other large hill masses of the Naktong Bulge. The NKPA 4th Infantry Division had taken maximum advantage of strong defensive terrain in accordance with the precepts taught by Soviet and Chinese Communist military instructors. This enlarged bridgehead was credited by Cinque Fee with giving the enemy the capability of mounting a serious threat to the main railroad from Pusan to Daegu. It took a bitter and costly effort on the part of the brigade, but the result was the most smashing defeat ever given an NKPA major unit up to this time. This reverse turned into a rout and slaughter toward the end as Marine air, artillery, armor, and mortars inflicted terrible losses. Broken NKPA forces were cut down in flight or while trying to swim the Naktong. If the brigade's first operation may be likened to a hard left jab, the fight in the Naktong Bulge is comparable to a solid right dealing a knockdown blow. The enemy lurched back to his feet, it is true, but the 3 rifle regiments of the NKPA 4th Infantry Division had to be filled up with hastily trained recruits. Arms ranging from rifles to howitzers were abandoned as impediments by the routed Communists, so that the rebuilt NKPA 4th Infantry Division needed new armament and equipment of all sorts. General MacArthur's summary of the action, reported to the UN Security Council on 18 September 1950, stated that attacks by the United States 24th Division and the Marines eliminated a major penetration of the Naktong defense line on 18 August. Here, the enemy 4th Division was decisively defeated, lost its bridgehead, and was thrown westward across the Naktong River, suffering very heavy losses in both personnel and equipment. Never before had a major NKPA unit taken such a staggering defeat. As evidence of recent victories won over United States troops, the 4th Infantry Division had brought captured American machine guns and 105mm howitzers into the Naktong Bulge. Among the most important results achieved by the brigade, therefore, was the hurt done to Red Korean morale. Not only was the enemy's Naktong bridgehead liquidated, he also lost heavily in time, which was becoming more valuable to him than space if he hoped to profit from his rapidly dwindling advantage in numbers. Not until 10 days later did the Communists establish another bridgehead in the Naktong Bulge area, and then it was their misfortune to encounter the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade again. During the early morning hours of 1 September 1950, the enemy made his final effort to smash through to Pusan. Again, the 27th Infantry was needed on another front, so that the Marines, as the only other mobile reserve unit, were committed under the operational control of the 2nd Infantry Division. The seriousness of the situation in the Naktong Bulge is indicated by the fact that the enemy had enlarged his new bridgehead with a penetration of about 4,000 yards in the sector of the 2nd Division. Elements of 4 enemy divisions had been identified on the central front when the Marines jumped off on the morning of 3 September. The brigade's 3-day fight did not end as decisively as the first battle of the Naktong. That is because it was an unfinished fight. The Marines were pulled out on the night of 5 September after gains of 2,500 to 3,000 yards that day, and it can only be conjectured what General Craig and his men might have accomplished during the next 48 hours. As it was, the brigade had a prominent part in disrupting the enemy's effort to sever the Pusan-Taegu lifeline. Heavy losses both in personnel and equipment were inflicted on NKPA forces, and the Marines helped to reduce the enemy's new bridgehead by 8,000 to 10,000 yards. Not only had the enemy lost the battle, he had lost the war, as it proved, for USAC staff officers were even then planning a great UN counterstroke in the Pusan perimeter. This drive was to be in conjunction with the amphibious assault on Incheon. The turning point in the UN fortunes of war owed in no small measure to the 3 counterattacks by the Marines in the Pusan perimeter. As for the overall effects, it would be hard to improve upon the analysis and evaluation in the Marine Corps Board study. A careful examination of any of these operations in which Marines engaged discloses that a single failure would have a profound effect upon the entire UN effort. On 3 separate occasions, the brigade was attached to the defending UN forces at points of dangerous enemy penetrations, and 3 times Marine units spearheaded the counterattacking elements and effectively stopped the enemy's efforts, seizing the initiative from him, inflicting serious losses upon him, and forcing the abandonment of immediate attempts at decisive penetration. Summaries and conclusions. No Marine tactical organization of history ever did more than the brigade to uphold the tradition of the Corps as a force in readiness. The transition from activation to embarkation took only 6 days, and it may be recalled that the brigade became the first United States unit to get into the fight after crossing the Pacific from the American mainland. Although the components had been hastily thrown together without opportunity for training or rehearsals, there were singularly few instances of tactical fumbling during the early actions. Some of the men had their only weapons familiarization instruction in actual battle when they fired new arms for the first time. But thanks to the steadying influence of combat-wise company officers and NCOs, the Marines of the brigade soon gained competence. The brigade command and staff faced unusual problems arising from such factors as emergency situations, hurried planning, oral orders, incomplete intelligence, and lack of adequate maps. There were decisions now and then which officers would not have made if they had been endowed with the wisdom of knowledge after the event. But on the basis of information at the time, the brigade command and staff need no whitewashing from history. Marine victories, on the other hand, may be attributed in large degree to a high order of leadership and professional ability in the upper echelons as well as on the company and platoon level. It might have been argued that it was a waste to commit amphibious specialists to the operations of mountain warfare. But Marines were also trained as infantry, and gravel-crunching fighting men were needed to correct an illusion held by many of their countrymen. Atomic bombs, guided missiles, jet planes, and other marvelous new weapons had convinced a large section of the public that the day of push-button warfare was at hand. These Americans sincerely believed that wars could be waged at long distance, and the Marines of the brigade served their country well by demonstrating that even in the tactical millennium it was necessary to seek out the enemy and close with him. For if there was any outstanding figure of the conflict in Korea, it was some second lieutenant making split-second decisions which meant life or death for a platoon holding a hill position against enemy attack in the darkness. The 3 squadrons of MAG-33 provided support which the brigade reported as the best close air support in the history of the Marine Corps, outstanding in its effectiveness. Army infantry officers were frankly envious on occasion, and Colonel Paul L. Freeman, U.S. Army, commanding the 23rd Infantry, commented that the Marines on our left were a sight to behold. Not only was their equipment superior or equal to ours, but they had squadrons of air in direct support. They used it like artillery. It was, "Hey Joe, this is Smitty. Knock the left of that ridge in front of Item Company." They had it day and night. It came off nearby carriers and not from Japan with only 15 minutes of fuel to accomplish mission. The UN forces, of course, had complete supremacy in the air. On 2 occasions, the Marines of the Brigade were briefly strafed by NKPA night hecklers making a scalded cat raid. During the interlude at the Bean Patch, an enemy plane winged its way under cover of darkness to cut loose with a brief burst of machine gun bullets before disappearing into the night. But United States Air Force planes had virtually destroyed the little NKPA Air Force during the first few weeks of the war, so that the men of the brigade were virtually unopposed in the air. The time interval between a request for Marine air support and the actual delivery varied according to local conditions, but the ground forces seldom had cause for complaint. All-Weather Squadron VMFN 513, based at Itazuke, Japan, was prevented by reason of faulty communications and liaison from responding to every request for dawn, dusk, or night support during early brigade operations, but such missions were flown effectively in the Naktong Bulge. Meanwhile, the Corsairs of VMF 214 and VMF 323, orbiting on station and always available for short notice employment, gave fresh proof that the Navy-Marine concept of carrier-based tactical aircraft was sound in practice. Following are the statistics of MAG-33 operations in Korea from 3 August to 14 September 1950. Squadron, VMF 214. Total sorties, 670. Miscellaneous sorties, 162. USMC, 337. Army, 111. ROC 60, total 508. Squadron, VMF 323, total sorties 498, miscellaneous sorties 90, USMC 304, Army 83, ROC 21, total 408. Squadron, VMFN 513, total sorties 343, miscellaneous sorties 264. USMC 21, Army 50, ROC 8, total 79. Totals. Total sorties 1,511. Miscellaneous sorties 516. USMC 662, Army 244, ROC 8, total 995. Demands on the time of the original 4 helicopters of VM-06 made it necessary to fly 2 more machines in from Japan. The rotary wing aircraft had so many firsts to their credit in the Pusan perimeter that a major tactical innovation was obviously in the making. The flights of General Craig, Colonel Snedeker, and Lieutenant Colonel Stewart alone were enough to indicate that the helicopter was capable of working a revolution in command and staff procedures. Altogether, the participation of the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade was an important factor in stopping the NKPA invasion in August 1950 and punishing the invaders so severely that they were ripe for a crushing defeat the following month. The Marines, moreover, did a great deal to restore the national pride of countrymen who had been hurt and bewildered by the outcome of the first month's operations. It was humiliating to read on the front page that only 5 years after reaching our greatest military strength of history, United States troops were being pushed around by Asiatic peasants of a Soviet-trained organization calling itself the North Korean People's Army. Perhaps these Americans did not remember that the decline in our armed forces was due to overwhelming popular demands for the disbanding of our victorious armies of 1945. At any rate, the United States paid the penalty of unpreparedness in 1950 when its first ground force units were beaten by better trained and equipped NKPA troops. Worse yet, correspondents at the front intimated that these defeats were due to the softness of our youth. It was charged that United States troops had been so pampered by motor transport that they could no longer march, let alone fight. The Marines helped to change all that. The Marines and the better Army units proved that they were more than a match for the enemy when it came to marching as well as fighting. The Marines did their best to restore the pride of Americans who read about the advance to Kosong or the fight on Obongni Ridge. The Marines, in short, deserve the pat on the back conveyed in a dispatch to the brigade on 23 August 1950 from their Commandant, General Clifton B. Cates. I am very proud of the performance of your air-ground team. Keep on hitting them, front, flanks, rear, and topside. Well done. End of Chapter 12, Part 2. End of U.S. Marine Operations in Korea, 1950 to 1953. Volume 1, The Pusan Perimeter, by Lynn Montross and Nicholas Canzona. Read by Aaron Bennett.